Hi there, my name is Caitlin Bandy and this is my channel BandysBooks. Today we are here to do our February wrap-up, and I know that this video is a little late. I typically shoot my February wrap-ups on the last day of the month and have it posted, but unfortunately last week did not go as planned. The app that I have been using to edit my videos decided to crash and it wiped out like 8 hours worth of work. It was supposed to have a cloud system that was supposed to keep all that work, and unfortunately the cloud system failed, and even after an hour of time spent with Adobe trying to recover my work, all of it was deleted. So that threw me off last week, and so now I am doing my February wrap-up today. That's okay though, because it gives me a little bit more time to reflect on my books, think about what I want to say about them, and just sit with my feelings, because February was one of those months that I needed to sit with my feelings. There was a lot of books that I read that were very moving, impactful, emotional, and so a little extra time to process them before I talk about them I think is a good thing in this case. One of the things that I was focused on for February was Blackathon. This was my first time participating in a readathon and I was very excited about it. I did participate for Team Hatshepsut, and this came with a series of prompts as well as a bonus book. So I'm gonna detail the prompts, what I read for them first, and then we'll get into the overall statistics on books and how I rated everything that I read for the month. Prompt number 1 is to read a book by a trans Black diasporic author. So I picked up Felix Ever After by Case and Calendar. This is a YA book that explores gender identity. I'm going to talk about this in a little more detail in the wrap-up, but I really enjoyed this and it fit perfectly for the prompt. Prompt number 2 is a book with a Black girl protagonist who is not afraid to be loud, confrontational, or take up space. I picked The Changeling by Victor Laval. The wife in this book is very much confrontational, very much who she is. She is concerned about things, nobody's listening to her, and she's not afraid to put her foot down. In fact, she goes to some pretty extreme lengths to do what she thinks is right in this case. And so I thought that that fit pretty well. Prompt number 3 is a book with impressive architecture or set largely in one place. And so I picked out Giovanni's Room by James Baldwin. This book does have several places it takes place, but the main focal location is literally Giovanni's room. Prompt number 4 is a book with lavishly wealthy characters or that explores class. The book that I picked actually does both of those things, and that is Yellow Wife by Sadiqa Johnson. So our main character, when she gets married, ends up in a pretty lavishly wealthy household, and this definitely explores class. It explores class, it explores race, it explores a whole lot of things, and so I felt that this fit perfectly with that prompt. And the bonus book for Team Hatshepsut was She Would Be King by Wyatt Moore. Unfortunately, my hold at the library did not come through before the end of February, so I didn't get a chance to read it. I do have it, and as soon as I get it, I will be reading it. But I did get to read Riot Baby by Tochi Onyebuchi, which is one of the bonus books for one of the other groups in Blackathon, and I really, really love that one. So I was super excited about that. I also really enjoyed watching videos by other people participating in Blackathon. I ended up finding so many amazing recommendations. I think my TBR has probably increased by like 40 or 50 books, which is a good problem to have in my opinion. Let's jump into the statistics and what I read for the entirety of the month. So for the month of February, I read a total of 24 books. For me, that is excellent. In a month that's shorter than the rest of the months, I usually aim to read between like 15 to 18. 20 would be like a great month. So hitting 24 was amazing for me. I think that I only really managed that because a couple of the books that I read were relatively short, so that kind of helped bolster my count a little bit. The total pages read for the month were 7,599. That's not too bad. This averages to about 317 pages per book. This is also not too bad. And my most prominent genres were literary fiction with 11, contemporary fiction with 9, historical fiction with 6, and surprise, big shocker here, I had 4 classics that I read this month. Now let's go ahead and get into my individual ratings for each book. I have a lot of books to talk about, obviously, with 24 books read, so we're gonna move through them relatively quickly. So we're gonna start with our 3-star reviews. The first book that I have is The Proposal by Jasmine Guillory. This was a book I was sent by a friend, and I'm not the biggest romance reader, but in a month with a lot of heavy reading, I figured that this was a really good time to pick this one up. And I'm so glad I did. I actually read this kind of mid-month. I had read a couple of heavier books before it, and this was a nice, refreshing break from all of that. I do have an entire review dedicated to this book up here, where we make a chicken enchilada recipe from this book and talk about, everything in depth. But overall, I really enjoyed it. It was cute, it was fluffy. It didn't fall into like the tropiness with a lot of romance that I dislike. So I thought that if you like romance, you might enjoy this book as well. After that, I have 50 Words for Rain by Asha Lemme. This book for me was kind of a mixed bag. On one hand, it's really lyrical and beautiful. The writing is superb in terms of quality. However, for me, it felt like it verged on trauma porn. And I feel like I've been talking about this a lot lately, but this is one of those books where I felt like the whole plot of the story was how much this character could be traumatized. We have a young woman who is half Black and half Japanese in a time where that's very scandalous. She's abandoned by her mother on the doorstep of her grandmother, and her grandmother has no love for her. In fact, she sees her as a scandal and an inconvenience. She's pretty much locked in a room and ignored most of the time, except for by a servant. And her life continues in that vein. There is just a lot of really horrific stuff that happens to her continuously. And I didn't feel necessarily like there was a point to all the suffering. It just kind of felt like one bad thing after another without any real purpose. And then that could have been okay in and of itself, but for me, the ending, I really disliked the way that it ended. I thought that it seemed counter to everything we knew this character to be. It felt like a complete character shift to offer some sort of a twist. So while it's beautiful and lyrical, and while I applaud the author's skill in writing, from a technical standpoint, I just didn't love it from a reader standpoint. After that, I have The Mothers by Britt Bennett. This was kind of a disappointment for me. So I loved The Vanishing Half. I thought that was a really good read, and I hoped that I was gonna love this one as much. This wasn't a bad book, and had I not read The Vanishing Half, I might have liked this one a little bit better. For me, I guess my big drawback with this book is that I felt like there was a very specific political position or religious position being taken within this book. And I felt like it was hammered home and hammered home and hammered home, and I feel like it kind of overtook parts of the book. This book is essentially about a young woman who gets pregnant and chooses to have an abortion. There's a very clear perspective offered within this book. And while I don't have to agree or disagree with that perspective, I felt like it became borderline preachy within this book at a certain point of repeating certain things. So just know that if you do pick up this book, it does deal with the topic of abortion, topic of loss, class, privilege, a whole bunch of different things, and it does have a very strong stance on specific issues. After that, I read Deacon King Kong by James McBride. This book made me realize something. So last year I read Harlem Shuffle by Colson Whitehead, and immediately on starting this, I kind of felt that this book had a similar vibe to that. Not that it's the same book, obviously different writers, different plots and all that, but it's just that same kind of, I don't know how to explain it, like a gritty New York City vibe. And I think I realized that this type of book or this style of writing is just not something that I resonate with really strongly. I did enjoy this book, but it took me about half of the book to really get into it. Like the first half, I was really struggling because there's so many characters, and it's kind of like you're putting all these puzzle pieces together, and I really wasn't seeing where the story was going. The second half of the book, though, was definitely a lot better for me. Once I started to understand what was happening and like the mystery started kind of being put together, I enjoyed it a lot more. So for me, this was really a tale of two different books. Overall, I think it was enjoyable, and I think if you're okay with being patient for the first half of the book, for the payoff in the second half of the book, then this is worth a read. And then I have Black Buck by Matteo Ascaripour. This is a satire, and I don't really get a chance to read satire very often, so this was a really unique experience for me. This is a book that follows a young man named Darren who is working at a Starbucks as a manager. He's told that he's so clever, and everybody in his community seems to have expected him to go a lot farther than just managing the local Starbucks. And one day while he's at work, a investment banker sort of guy comes in and he upsells him on a drink. And this guy is super impressed with it and offers him an interview. Darren goes to the interview and is eventually hired, and he's gonna start working at a startup company that's planning to revolutionize the psychology game. So the first part of this book was amazing. I wanna say like maybe the first 50 to 60%. Darren is the only Black guy. He's super uncomfortable with like the increasing antics surrounding him, this just insane, bloodthirsty corporate attitude that this company has. There's even a scandal where the company parades Darren out to make themselves look much more diverse than they are. I think all of this was really, really well done and a just sharp critique of the corporate world in America. The second part of the book is where it really goes off the rails for me. It just gets too chaotic. There's a couple different subplots that are happening, and it's like there's just too much going on for me. I wish that this book had stayed tighter in and focused in on Darren's personal experience with this company instead of shooting off into these different subplots. All in all, though, I still thought that this was pretty excellent satire, and if you're interested in satirical writing, might be worth picking up. After that, I have Hold You Down by Tracy Brown. This is a book about two sisters. One sister living on the straight and narrow. She's struggling to get by, but she's managing to do. And the other sister who's tired of stuck being poor and decides that she's gonna do what it takes to like accrue some wealth. So she decides that she's gonna get into the crack cocaine game, and she starts cooking crack at her house. Both sisters have young children, and they have this tight relationship, but the relationship starts to kind of fray around their decisions and how they're getting by in life. Eventually they kind of reconnect, and when one sister dies, the other sister ends up being a mom to two kids. My biggest issue is this spans such a large chunk of time, and it just felt a little bit like disjointed, I think, because of that expanse of time. It didn't feel like one cohesive story to me. It felt like almost like a play where there's like three separate acts, or like it could have been three little novellas. I wanted something that was a little bit more fluid and a little bit more cohesive, and it just, for me, there was a little bit lacking to it. All right, and now into my 4-star reads. The first of my 4-star reads was Riot Baby by Tochi Onyebuchi. This is a book that is really a pretty short book, but very, very poignant. It is a dystopian version of America. We have two siblings. One sibling is showing like some telekinetic powers, and then the other sibling is literally born on the night of the Rodney King riots, and it's kind of almost portrayed as like an omen for his future to come. As the story progresses, the brother in the situation is incarcerated and then eventually released from his incarceration to like a post-jail system. It's a really subtle dystopian look at the United States and our current incarceration system. It's interesting because it's only like incrementally further than what already exists. So there are some like supernatural elements included that make it obviously outside of reality. But if you look at the structures of incarceration and post-incarceration and the way that Black people are treated within this book, it's really not at all far from what exists currently. And that's what makes it such an effective dystopia. The subtlety of this made it just chilling, and I really ached for our main character as we follow him through this system. Really an excellent book. Honestly, I debated between 5 and 4 stars for this, and I think the only reason that I didn't bump it up to 5 stars is that it just in points felt a little maybe rushed, or like it was missing a little bit of the detail that I wanted. Had this been maybe 50 pages longer, I think it would have been so stunning. As it is, it's already stunning. I don't want to make it sound like it's not, but I wished it went a little bit further than it did. After that, I have Mame by Jessica George. I did a full in-depth review of this book, which you can find up here. After that, we have Reversing Me Home by Eleanor Shearer. This is a historical fiction, one that I also reviewed in depth, which you can check out here. And then we have Giovanni's Room by James Baldwin. This is the first of the classics that are going to appear on this list. This is about a man in France. He's met a man named Giovanni. He's fallen in love. They have kind of an affair, but the main character has a wife over in Spain somewhere, and we know she's coming back eventually. So we know that this affair is probably not going to be long-lived. This is set in a time in which gay couples are not accepted, and so both of our characters are really trying to hide their relationship, and it's very tragic. So our main character is reflecting on this time that he had with Giovanni and the tragedy of it and the heartbreak and the morality. He's struggling with decisions that he made. This is a very quiet book and very reflective. Next up, we have Sing Unburied Sing by Jesmyn Ward. This is a National Book Award winner, and I can see why. So this follows a family via 2 POV characters. We have our first POV character named Jojo. He is a young boy and he's living with his grandparents. The grandfather's teaching him how to be a man. His grandmother is like emotionally supporting him and giving him advice, even though she's dealing with a terminal illness, unfortunately. And our second POV character is Leonie, who is Jojo's mother, and she's struggling with drug addiction. She's struggling with being a single mother. Her partner is incarcerated at the beginning of the story, but she is anticipating his release from prison. So as the release date approaches, Leone packs up Jojo and his younger sister Michaela and takes off on a road trip to pick up her partner. And this road trip is just kind of heartbreaking. Like, you really see Leone failing to be a mother. Kayla gets sick, she's not feeding the kids. She has just this single-minded focus of getting to where she's going and like dealing with her addiction and stuff. And the kids are just kind of forgotten about in the whole story. I wanted to reach through and protect Jojo and Kayla. It was hard at times to read it. Eventually, she does get her partner from prison, and things start to even out. He's actually much more of a father and much more interested in forming a relationship with his children. Unfortunately, he's been gone for a while, so that's a little bit tough too. It's not like an instant bond. But this really just explores family. It explores the ghosts of our past, the history of the South. It explores incarceration, the effects on family, addiction, terminal illnesses. It really touches on a lot of deep themes. It was a really beautifully written book, and it tells the story in a very unique way. I think that there was parts where I felt a little bit confused about what was going on, but overall I thought it was a really excellently written book. Then I have Felix Ever After by Case and Calendar. This is a book about a young person exploring their gender identity. At the start of the story, Felix feels that he is a boy. However, throughout the story, Felix begins to question his identity and kind of explore the different identities that are available to him. It also deals with him being outed as trans, and it deals with him falling in love and pursuing relationships. And then it also deals with things that like teenagers deal with on a regular basis: bullying, friends that are not really friends, pressures of school, all sorts of different stuff, pressures of getting into college. I thought it was just really, really well done. Then we have Walhalla by Nikki May. So I thought going into this that this was going to be more of a contemporary fiction. Really what it was is more of a thriller. Totally okay with that. It's about 3 friends. They're all living in the UK. They are all tangentially related to each other via their families back in Nigeria. And a 4th friend gets introduced to their group. And as soon as the 4th friend shows up, things start to get interesting. There's a lot of miscommunication. There's jealousy over relationships. There's all of this like bad vibes going on, and nobody can really explain it. And it becomes suspenseful trying to figure out what exactly is going on. Is this person bad luck? Is she sabotaging things? Is there some other like plan that's going on? It's a really interesting book. We also find out that Walhalla means trouble, and that's really what this book is about, is trouble between all of these friends and their dynamic. I thought that this was really good. I was pretty invested in it and enjoyed following along with what was happening between all of these people. My biggest issue with this book, and the only reason it didn't verge into a 5-star for me, was that I didn't really love the ending. I thought that the first 75% of the book was really strong, and then the last 25% got a little bit implausible and just kind of left everything loose-ended. And now on to the 5-star reads. My first 5-star read was The Changeling by Victor Lawal. This is a combination between horror and folklore and fantasy, and then like a little bit of gritty real life mixed in. It follows a family as they have their first baby, and then a tragic event occurs, the wife disappears, and the husband is left searching for answers. Wow, this book was spectacular. It combined all of the elements of folklore and fairy tales with horror, and then still like started in a really realistic place. It was fantastic. Can't recommend this enough. If you're a horror reader, if you're a fantasy reader, if you like fairy tales, like pretty much if you like any of those genres, you will probably like this book. After that, I have If Beale Street Could Talk by James Baldwin, and this was the first classic that I read within the month, and what a way to start. This book was so good. Honestly, I feel like this should have been a book that was on my high school reading curriculum, and if it had been, maybe I'd have a different relationship with classics. This follows a character named Fonnie and a character named Tish. They have an unplanned pregnancy. They're both very young. However, Tish's family is pretty supportive of the situation. Fonnie has an altercation with a white police officer. It's tense. He actually doesn't do anything wrong. It's just this police officer doesn't like the way that he came off. And so this police officer plans for retribution. Fonnie ends up incarcerated over something that is an unjust charge, and he is in prison. Tish and her family are organizing to try to get Fonnie out of jail in time to be there for Tish to have the baby and, to be a dad to his child. Unfortunately, Fonnie's family is not the most supportive, and there's a lot of drama with them. They are basically like writing him off as trash and really only his dad seems to care about what happens to him. But Tish and her mother and father and sister are so supportive, and they go to like extraordinary lengths to try to clear his name of his crimes. And this really just follows the family as they deal with the fallout of his incarceration. I felt like all the characters in this book were so well written. The whole thing from top to bottom, I couldn't stop reading it. It's a really short book, so I went through it really, really quickly. I couldn't put it down. And it's a book that I felt myself sitting with for a couple days after finishing it. And I think the reason that I sat with it so much is because it's something that's so relevant today. To me, it's remarkable, and it speaks the talent of an author when a book was written, 50, 60 years ago, but it could have been written today because it's still so relevant, and the critique of it is so sharp. And I felt that was very much the case with If Beale Street Could Talk. It is still, like, the issues that it discusses are still so applicable today. And it's a sad thing that they're applicable today. I wish that was not the case. Like, I wish that this was a book that was irrelevant now because all those issues had been fixed. But it is just remarkable writing, and I think it really still speaks to a lot of what happens in society today. And then we have We Are Not Like Them by Joe Piazza and Christine Pride. This is a book that I buddy read with my friend Allie over on Instagram. I'm so glad that I buddy read this one. This is a book that I feel like requires a lot of discussion. It is told through two perspectives. We have Riley, who is a Black woman and a journalist, and we have Jen, who is the wife of a police officer. She's white and she's pregnant. And the story revolves around the shooting of a young, unarmed Black teenager. This teenage boy is doing nothing wrong, and he is killed. And we get to see the response of this situation from both Jen's perspective and Riley's perspective. So Jen's husband is one of the officers involved in the shooting. She's feeling very protective of him. She's feeling like the media backlash towards her and her husband is unfair. They're being called racists and murderers. And she knows her husband to be a good person. She knows he didn't intentionally shoot this child, that it's his new rookie partner that was, the one that pulled the gun and made the initial shots fired situation happen. And she just feels enraged by the whole situation. And she's protective of this baby that's about to come into the world too. And then we have Riley, whose job as a journalist brings her into the direct circle of the mother of the boy who is slain. And she gets to know the victim's family and the community and the church that he was going to, and she becomes really emotionally invested in the situation. She's angry. She's angry as a Black woman that people from her community keep being gunned down senselessly. She's tired of seeing Black boy after Black boy murdered by the police officer, tired of hearing the lines that, oh, we thought he had a gun and then no gun is found. She's just tired of it all. And so we have two people that are coming from very passionate, emotional places who are best friends and have been best friends for a really long time, and their friendship starts to fray over this situation. And then I have How to Be an Anti-Racist by Ibram X. Kendi. This was one of my nonfiction reads for the month, and this basically talks about the difference between being not racist and anti-racist. So it defines somebody as not racist as somebody who maybe isn't like out yelling racial slurs or petitioning for laws that, create racist structures, but isn't actively doing anything to end racism either. And somebody that's anti-racist is somebody that's like out actually working to end racism, out protesting, out petitioning, out, doing things that are making some difference in the fight against racism. And then we have The Bluest Eye by Toni Morrison. This is a book that's heavily banned in the United States. I knew going into it that it was going to be a difficult read, but man, I still feel like I wasn't quite prepared for what I got. This book follows a character named Pecola, and Pecola is kind of portrayed as really unattractive, homely. She's kind of made fun of, and she's just not the most desirable person in the beginning of the story. She has this desire to have blue eyes, and I think she associates having blue eyes with suddenly being beautiful. It's a lot of internalized racism. She goes throughout this book and things just keep happening to her. You keep rooting for her and you want things to get better, and they just never really do. There is a graphic depiction of sexual assault in this book. It does deal with racism, sexism, misogyny, internalized racism, beauty standards, a whole lot of really difficult topics. It also talks about class, poverty, like you name it, it runs the gambit, but it is a really powerful and deep read. And then I have The Yellow Wife by Sadiqa Johnson. This is a book about a character named Phoebe. Phoebe is the daughter of a slave owner and a slave. And she is, at the start of the story, still a slave, but she is somewhat sheltered by her father. He never allows her to be like whipped or tortured. and he just protects her from some of the brutality of slavery. She still sees slavery, and she still sees the slaves around her being treated pretty badly, but she definitely is protected to a certain degree. When her father dies, his wife takes over, and she is vengeful. This is, her husband's daughter out of wedlock through an affair with a slave at that, and she takes this all out on Phoebe. She treats her horribly, she puts her in impossible situations, she asks her to do things that are horrific, and then Phoebe makes a decision that she thinks is morally the correct decision to make, and is punished for it. She's punished by being sold off to slavers and taken to a prison. At the prison, she's put up on an auction block and basically told to strip down and offered to men to be sampled. She refuses to be sexually violated. She refuses to undress. She's like, I'll take the beating. I'm not gonna do this. And this catches the attention of the head jailer. He tells her to, come with him, and he starts to court her. She doesn't really know what's going on. Like, he's basically inviting her to hang out with him, to eat cake with him. He talks to her, asks her questions. She comes to find out that he wants to make her his wife. She decides she's gonna marry this man as an act of self-protection. This follows her story as the wife of this head jailer and all of the impossible places that she gets put in. What happens in this book is horrific, but it's also extraordinarily well written. The detail and the level of research in this book is very, very clear. Sadiqa Johnson is an excellent writer, and I totally understand why this receives such rave reviews. I will say that this book is probably got the heaviest amount of trigger warnings of anything on my entire TBR. There are so many, and I definitely would recommend researching them before you decide to jump into this. I am not somebody that's like heavily triggered by what I read, and I still felt a lot of like nausea and discomfort reading this book. There are some details that are pretty graphic, so just know that going into it, and definitely maybe prepare yourself to read something a little bit fluffier and lighter after as a bit of a balance, because this one is definitely one of the hardest reads I think I've done. And my final 5-star read was The Power of Dignity: How Transforming Justice Can Heal Our Communities by Judge Victoria Pratt. So this is about Judge Victoria Pratt and her courtroom. She is a Black Latina woman from a working class family, and she was seeing a lot of people from similar communities in her own courtroom. And so she believes in transformative justice. Instead of treating people like they're all criminals and all worthless, she treats people with dignity and respect. And instead of just sentencing people and throwing away the key, she is someone that looks a lot into alternative sentencing, having people write essays to explain the hardships they face, really understanding the people that enter her courtroom. She really believes in giving people opportunities for second chances and allowing them to heal instead of just throwing people in jail and locking away the key. Her focus on transformative justice and dignity is remarkable, and if more people approached our justice system the way that she does, we would have a much better justice system. This was from Seal Press Books, and I really appreciated it. It was an excellent read. So those are all of my books for the month of February. My favorite read for the month was The Changeling by Victor Laval. I can't recommend it enough. If you like horror, fantasy, folklore, anything like that, you will probably like this book. And my least favorite book was unfortunately Hold You Down by Tracy Brown. Wasn't a bad book, just probably the one that I connected with the least out of everything that I read. So if you like this video, hit the thumbs up, comment down below, and let me know what your favorite read for February was. And if you're not already subscribed to this channel, you know what to do. Hit the subscribe button down below and the notification bell so that you never miss a video. That way we can see each other again soon. Thanks so much for joining. Bye.